There is a little bit of an issue that I come across sometimes from questions that people ask me about Taoism. Because a lot of people, they think when they talk about religious Taoism that religious Taoism is mostly just male gods like Lao Jun or the Jade Emperor. They forget that there are important reasons to understand that that is not the case. And today I'm going to talk with you a little bit about it. I'm going to talk to you about the role of women in Chinese society as a whole. I'm going to talk to you about Daoist alchemy and the role of women in there, both in single practice and in dual practice. And I'm going to talk with you about the role of female gods in general, and I'm going to talk about the Earth Goddess specifically. And that last one is the tip of the thing, so watch the video to the end so that you have a good overview over all the different kind of details that are relevant for this story, because the Earth Goddess is, as far as I'm concerned, the most important god that everybody who practices Qigong or Tai Chi Chuan should know about. Because the Earth Goddess, for everybody who practices Chinese medicine, practices Tai Chi Chuan or Neidan, or Qigong or Daoyin, she is at the heart of your practice without you knowing. So not knowing means not respecting. When we talk about the role of women in Chinese society, then we actually have to tell a little bit in general terms over the last, say, 3,000 years. In the past, there were more equal rules between male and females in China. There are still some leftovers from matriarchal societies, but you have to understand that China was an expansive empire that started in the Yellow River Basin and gradually grew all the way to its current boundaries and its influences. It has always been a power player from the Qing dynasty onward, where it was extracting funding from the surrounding countries. And it was a mercantile state. That means that everything was basically owned by the emperor, and the emperor was sidelined by the empress, so there was always an empress, and the emperor also had usually several women. For instance, there is this theory, one yang, two yin, and this is based on the I Ching, because there's one yang line, and one yang line, when it breaks in two, there's a two yin. And these two together meant for many Confucians in large parts of Chinese culture that every man could have two wives. And as a result of that, there was inflation, and some people, especially emperors, they started having more and more wives over time, and a lot of court intrigues that are now still feeding Chinese television. You see the same in Korean television and Japanese television, because it's East Asian culture, it's based on Confucianism, and they had this idea. But women were, for several reasons, very important. For instance, we talk about Islam, about women wearing hijab and dresses like this. There is the gaitao. The gaitao is the Chinese equivalent of the hijab. And this was first developed in the Han Dynasty and was a sign of Confucian women to show their aristocratic demeanor. So at the moment when they were wearing that because they said, I'm very special because I am aristocratic, and as a result of this aristocratic thing, the ordinary people should not look at me. It is not necessarily only the idea of the Han women. It was also, of course, partly inspired by the Han men, and it also created a further masculization of the society, and therefore the role of women seemed to go a little bit more to the backwards sides of society. In the Song Dynasty, the rules for this were much more strict. If you were aristocratic, you were not allowed out of the house, unless when you were wearing a gaitao. Because at the moment when you wear this, you are completely covered and nobody can see you, so the man's possession is protected. Chinese women were active in spiritual and religious roles also. In fact, Chinese women were very often a little bit forced to choose for a life following their parents and live in a family. So they would move into another family and they would be called wife. If a man, for instance, without possession would marry with a woman of some wealth, then at that moment it would be called a live-in man. So it was not called a wife, but a live-in man. That means that he was not the owner of the estate, but he was sort of the possession of the wife. The ownership of everything was on the wife. Then at the moment when you go look at it further, the only way to escape that, if you didn't like that kind of life as a wife, was either become a prostitute. That could mean for sexual services, but also to be a musician in an inn, or something like this, to become an artisan, painter, make things for other people, and as a result of that develop yourself in an artistic sense, in a sort of self-development part. The other part is you could enter into a monastery. Buddhism was not very famous for accepting women. It was mostly focused on men for a long time. Now that is different. But women were allowed in Daoist monasteries, and as a result of that they were sort of equal in most cases, not always, between male and female roles. So you could have a female monk, female priest, female abbot, and so on and so forth. When it is also true that women were clustered together and men were clustered together, because for specifically monastic things, the sexual mingling of male and female was strictly regulated. That means also that, of course, there was attention for all kind of Daoland practices, and in Chinese medicine specifically we see the outcropping of that in the form of Fuke. Fuke is already from before the Han Dynasty, before the Qin Dynasty, or in the oldest text on Chinese medicine. Everybody realized women are extremely important, because without women there wouldn't be any men. Very simple. That means that women had to be protected against disease and so on, and even in this time that means that women are still obeying particular kind of rules and principles to make sure that they stay healthy, and also that they influence the quality of the child already from the moment of conception. That means that the woman had as a task to educate the child from the moment of conception, and this was mostly on health and mentality practice. For instance, it was important that the woman during pregnancy did not involve itself with all kind of bad behaviors, but that they would make music, write poems, be very kind and sweet, and so on and so on, to make sure that the baby in the belly would receive all these kind of qualities. That was the role of the wife. The man had his own roles within that context, and of course there was heaven and earth that would create the perfection parts of it. And the thing is, you know, maybe about Yuanfen, maybe you know about karma. These are factors that play a role in everybody's life because of the intention that you develop. And if the parents behave well, then the intention of the child will be better too. If the parents do not behave well, then the children become frustrated, and that exemplifies itself maybe more extreme in the way how they deal with their life. Because a child, when it learns something, it learns from the parents, and whatever it learns, it considers good, because children have no morality. This is the reason why in Chinese medicine traditionally children until maybe 15, 16 years are considered demons, and hopefully before 33 they are finished with being demons and they finally become human, because they become their own human being, and they're no longer the result of the education by their parents, but they are the result of the education by themselves. Water, best thing in the world. So when we look at these kind of things, you see that medicine is very important. Many big books and papers have been written over time to make sure that the pregnancy of the woman would go well, and there were many kind of diseases classified specifically for that purpose, and therefore Chinese medicine knows a lot about women as being different from men. And you can say that in Chinese medicine there are two different kinds of medicine. There is the Fuke and there is the Yishe, or the Yike. And the Ika is basically the medicine in general, which is about general issues. The thing with Chinese medicine is that men are considered easy, women are considered complicated, because the circulation of blood in the body is going with the moon and is moving all the time and is going in up and down qualities, and people sometimes have more difficulty regulating their emotions and so on, and we get back to that later. And as a result of that, you need to take into account with a woman that because of the menstrual cycle, when a disease treatment goes into the right direction, menstruation comes and it will drop. This is different when you use preconception or if you use anti-conception medication, because anti-conception, like we know nowadays, they didn't have in the past. They did have, but it also did sometimes lead to infertility, permanent. Yeah, that was of course not intended, but it is not as hygienic as people usually think. There are of course still people who advocate these kind of things, and that might sometimes be okay, but sometimes maybe not so okay. It depends a little bit on your constitution. Somebody with a healthy constitution can handle much more than others. The best thing is just to be careful. When we look at these things, I've already said in another video that medicine and religious activities, the spiritual activities that people see, they are all interrelated with each other. And you can see that from Weidan and Neidan practice, medicine was a natural outcropping in the sense of doing acupuncture, massage, and herbal medicine and food medicine. Food medicine, like massage and exercise, most important, acupuncture for more urgent things, and herbal medicine only for the most urgent things, which are going to be very damaging if you don't do anything about it, because all foods, and especially herbs, they are considered poisons and they might be very harmful to you. So natural within the Daoist context means basically natural, like it belongs there, not in you. So when it comes into you, it might harm you. This is something that usually people in the West and modern societies do not really understand about Chinese medicine. They think that because it's natural, it's good for you. But I can tell you, acupuncture can kill you and can heal you. Qigong can kill you and can heal you. Now, all these kind of things, they have two sides. If it wouldn't be like that, it wouldn't actually be effective, because how can something only be one thing without the other? This is a wisdom that comes already from Lao Tzu, where I just recently did a few videos about. So you should actually also check that out. The thing is, Chinese medicine in itself is based on very practical things, things that have to work. This is also what my research project is based upon, and very soon the program will be active, and you can read this book already to see what it is about, because this is about the current crisis that we have and what role Chinese medicine can play in that. And that's a very important part, because Chinese medicine is very much undervalued, and the main reason for that is the westernization, and also the fact that it is not recognized as something that is completely sane. So yeah, what do you do about it? Then I thought, when you look at the spiritual trajectory of the women in Chinese culture, you can see that at the beginning there were particular kind of functions like shaman types. They were usually female. You still see that in Korea, where shaman types are still very active, and in China you have them, and you can see them also when you go look at the Weixin. You have many channels about that, where they show their services, and you can see that there's this intertwinement of lay knowledge, which you also find back in Taoism and Buddhism, and some parts also in Confucianism. You can see this intertwinement in there, and women play a large role in that, because their relationship with deities sometimes is pretty tantric, in the sense that, like in Vajrayana in Tibetan Buddhism, they get into a sort of a marriage with a particular kind of god, or they get into a relationship with a particular kind of goddess, and that is very important. But in Taoism also, when you are a Taoist monk and you're studying, especially in particular kind of deep practices, you get into connection with Si Wang Mu, a very famous Daoist goddess. We will talk about that later on also. And Si Wang Mu is the protector of the immortals, but it also protects the immortal realm against people who are accidentally become immortal. Because if you don't have the right moral attitude and you haven't done the work, why would you be allowed into the heavenly realm? So there is a process that you have to follow, in spite of what people sometimes seem to think about Lu Dongping, who is giving medication away to people to make you immortal. It is not every kind of immortal. Heavenly immortal, definitely higher entry fees than the earthly immortal, which is not necessarily the easiest. Like the Tibetan way of reincarnation is considered a earthly immortal pathway, so that is belonging to the lower realms of immortality, nonetheless equally important. And even in the Bible, it is being discussed as the actual original form of immortality. And there's a lot of truth in that, that people originally, you would become about 1,000 years old. This is what Daoists also say. And because of becoming 1,000 years old, you see a large part of history, and you can see the natural stillness and slowness of nature passing by. You can watch the stars and understand it, and you can understand the physical cycle of being human much better. So at the moment when we look at these kind of things, you see that at a certain point, say from the 12th century onward, from the 8th century onward, you see that female alchemy becomes more and more important. The most famous female alchemist that we know is Sun Bu-er, and Sun Bu-er is one of the students of Wang Chongyang, the founder of Zhuangzhen monastic Taoism, of which has included a lot of different kind of Buddhist practices, but also some shamanic things and all kinds of other things, and it has been subdivided in different branches, and the Sun Bu-er is then the least well known, and from all the different branches except for women. Brings me also to the idea that also women, they developed at a certain point, I think in the Qing dynasty, their own script, because, you know, they were not being taken very serious, so by writing their own script they could read and communicate with each other without their husbands knowing that. They would think that they would just make some decorative things, because there were some times where the attitude towards women was very backwards, and women were not allowed to study or to learn to read and write and so on. So these kind of skills were actually really very important for women. What I want to talk to you first about Daoland is that the first text that we know that really addresses Daoland from a female perspective is by Cao Wenyi. I will read a bit about that from her work, an introduction of what is called the Ling Yuan Da Dao Ge. And this is a text which basically outlines the principles of Daoist alchemy and takes into consideration also the differences between male and female practitioners, because that is very important to realize. The male and female practitioners are, because of their biology, very different, right? So the process that you as a woman has to go to compared to that from a man is very different. I have been translating some things about that, and it is in the Yangshen module from our Chinese medicine program, which very soon will also be individually available for people separate from the 2-year bachelor program, so that you can complement it with your current Chinese medicine program, because it is very important to know these kind of things, to learn these kind of things, and maybe it actually helps you to shift from the course that you have to this one, which is more based on Daoist history than TCM is. Because as you probably know worldwide, but especially in the United States, and also in Europe, the amount of students going to study Chinese medicine becomes less and less and less, because people feel cheated when they're studying. They know that what they learn is basically Western medicine. They can feel it in their bones. So at a certain point they don't believe it anymore, and they don't have access to something better, because it is not necessarily allowed. There is a lot of repression towards ancient knowledge in that sense, not only by Chinese government officials, because in China you're allowed to study it. It's just that it has to be explained within their own Hegelian dialectic, scientific and scientismic perspective, and in the West also it has to be explained within the context of biomedicine, and for some people within the context of esoterics, Western esoterics, because this is what they think they understand, not realizing that what they call Western esoterics is just 30 years old, 40 years old in the popularization process. And actually returning to the roots, like what we do here at the IOC Daoland program, that is then part of the next stage of the development, namely looking for the actual thing. Because the esoterics has been falsified because of commerce.
Let me tell you the truth. The root of life has always been in the true breath. The body is eternal and empty, and the numinous mirror encompasses the sky and accommodates all things. The magic of Tai Chi is that if one gets one, he should hold on to it carefully and not lose it. The Shun resides alone in the empty palace, and the Hongpo is tormented, and its blood is dried up. Sadness, joy, thought, indulgence, and fatigue will damage your body. I am hurt in the morning and damaged every night without knowing it, and my Shun is in a state of confusion and has no place to rest. It gradually wears away and becomes weaker, and its vitality is exhausted, and its Shun leaves. It is said that walking and sitting in Chan is also Chan. Saints can be like this, but ordinary people cannot. The buds are tender and must be reserved. The roots are confused and easily changeable. If you waste time without knowing how to remove the thorns, you will never hear of a good crop growing out of a barren field. After 9 years of hard work, the fire is ready, and you can respond to things without mind and transform quickly.
When we talk about Neidan practice and also Weidan practice, you have to take into consideration that your biology is very important, and you can see that in all alchemical traditions of China. If you do not study also medicine as a whole, your alchemical procedure will not go very far. You can practice Qigong whatever you want, but it won't heal you or it won't improve on your health without the proper context that you understand how to adapt your practice to your personal circumstances. So let's get a little bit deeper on this. When we talk about Wen Chengyi's ideas, you see that she puts 3 things as central in her practice. First, breath practice, then control over your emotions, which is partly related to the way how your blood and your qi circulates in the body, and so on and so on. And you see that you should have no mind. And this no mind is the idea that you have punched through the veil of thoughts that is in your mind, and that you can understand that your mind is not your thinking, and that your awareness is going beyond, or no, below your mind. And as a result, that because of your awareness, if you're being pushed out of your awareness, then at that moment that's the Shun. When you are pushed out of the awareness, you get emotional processes, and from these emotional processes you get thoughts. So this is a very important part to understand. My neighbors were getting a little bit noisy, so I just slow down their sound a bit. I hope the microphone doesn't pick up on it. So when you look at this perspective, you see that the way how in Neidan things are being done, that relates very much to the different gods and goddesses in the Daoist religious traditions. And therein you see that because of that there's also this cultivation of not only the individual, male and female, as being different, but the combination of the two, and which we would call in the West tantric practices. And the way how tantric practices are being introduced, as my teacher Liu Dongan used to tell me, is that there's always a one-to-one introduction from a male to a female, from a female to a man, because of the nature of the practices. So giving a class in these kind of things is going to be very difficult, and as a result that there's usually only a few practitioners, true practitioners. You can instruct people in some basic techniques, but if you don't have the proper basics in Neidan as an individual, then the Neidan as a dual cultivator will be of lesser value. And that is a very important part. It's not enough to be aware of your dantian. You really have to have a good working knowledge about how your body works, how your mind works, and how the circulation in your body and so on and so work, and how you relate to the environment around you, and how you are connected with nature, the universe, and the earth. And this is where we slowly start getting into this. So that means that the mixed practices with male and female, they are also the foundation for what we could call the Vajrayana practices, the Tanda practices from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, where male and female deities are having intercourse. And in also partner practices, there is then in the form of ritual or in the form of actual practice, depending on what level you want to practice, there's also in that sense also this kind of intercourse. And the course that people usually do in the West, but also in the modern China, are usually based on Western psychotherapy. They have to feel good, they're not practical. In a similar kind of session, in a sense, Qigong, Tai Chi Chuan, it has to feel good, but it's not necessarily proper. Or you want to deal with your aggression, so you learn the martial arts part of it, and that is also not exactly right. We do that in another video, because that's a long story in itself. Like I said, I already translated several of these texts. You can find them in our I Ching courses, you can find them in the Yangshan course, you find it in Chinese medicine course, so they're a little bit spread out over different kind of content, and some of them will maybe eventually find their way towards a book if I think that might become helpful at some point. But right now I'm busy with my crisis management, not my personal crisis, but the global crisis and which role Chinese medicine can play in there. And if you are a practitioner or if you are interested in Chinese medicine, you should get involved. So just make sure you follow the link in the commentary towards that process. One thing that is very important to realize is that when you become a Taoist, one of the things that you're being asked is not to do dantian meditation. The meditation on stilling your mind, that's basically a beginner's trick. And in Buddhism, that is much more important than in Taoism in that sense. It is important, yeah, because it is the way how you start your learning. At the moment when you are getting a little bit acquainted with it, at a certain point you will have to transcend from the psycho-behavioral work of your internal substances, like water and steam and heat and fire and so on, and you have to get into the more consciousness realm, and then you come to the discovery that you have to learn the existence of 48,000 body spirits, but also of 3,000 gods of the water realm, 3,000 gods of the heavenly realm, and 3,000 gods of the earthly realm. Preferably you know them by name, and that is a lot. And if you are not ready to learn these kind of things, spend time on it, and therefore also not being willing to do the meditative rituals that belong to it, and at that moment you're just singing songs, or you're just participating in something that you don't really comprehend within the context of the whole of the Daoist alchemical process, because ritual is part of the alchemical process, and it is not necessarily easy to process. So therefore the learning process is being divided in several stages, and for women that is just a little bit longer, because they have to learn to control what is called the red dragon. The main gods that people see up front are male gods, like the Jade Emperor, like Tungwu, like the three pure ones, and so on and so on. But just a little bit behind, there's their mother. There's the mother of Tungwu, there's the mother of the Jade Emperor, and so on and so forth. The mother is always very important, and Lao Tzu mentions the Dark Mother already as the origin of the Tao. So the Tao itself might be called male, but it is the result of the Dark Mother that is behind it. So that is what is usually called the prenatal existence. That is where, when you are pregnant, are trying to influence your upcoming baby. You're trying to influence the prenatal origin of that being. And as a result of that, make sure that what comes out is as little demonic as possible, so that you have an easier time educating that kid. Then, when you look at it from there, you see that a goddess like Xiongnu, which is busy with all kind of things. Originally was a snake god. Through self-cultivation became part of the higher pantheon, and she became the wife of the Jade Emperor. Xiongnu was supposed to have lived in graves. That is the original story, and she belongs to the Western sphere, because this is where the Hun and the Po go to at the moment when you die. Your body has to separate in different parts. One part of the earth goes back and one part goes to heaven, and that is not actually yours. It was also given to you by earth and heaven, and they are part of your education by heaven and earth. And if you do not abide to the lessons of heaven and earth, then at that moment they turn against you, because they have better things to do than trying to hold on to a life which is wasted. This is why people become sick, and this is why people become confused, and all kind of other reasons. So through ritualization of your life, you can deal with these kind of things and improve yourself with that. When we look at all these different kind of goddesses that you have, like the Doma, the goddess of time, like Kuan Yin, and so on, they all play major roles. And there's like many more, because you can imagine that if there's 3,000 gods of the water, there's 3,000 gods of the earth, and 3,000 gods of heaven, it is very unlikely that there's only going to be male gods. That is a little bit too ridiculous. There's no idea in the world that can actually make that realistic. You see, I'm struggling with my notes. Like I already showed, the world is divided in Taoism in three realms: heaven, earth, and water. And normally when you look at modern Daoist books, they talk about Tianxia, and they talk about Tianxia as that below heaven. Xia means below. And that means that everything below heaven looks up at heaven, which is not exactly the case, because earth does not look up to heaven. You have actually a Di Xiang, and a Di Xiang is actually the earth that is and that what is above, and that what is above is heaven, and that is the water realm. Part of the water realm is the realm of people. We are in there somewhere, right? And in the internal process, you have a repetition of the whole process outside of you. So at the moment when you look at it from that perspective, you can see that the goddess of the earth, grandmother earth, actually is essential. And like in the I Ching, you can see that the I Ching is divided in heaven, earth, and the extrapolation of all the different lines and events between them. So heaven and earth are the extreme, and they are considered by many texts as being timeless and endless. And the aim for the cultivator is to become like heaven and earth, timeless and limitless in your expansiveness. And your behavior has to be like that. So the more personal you take your life, the more limited you become, the less expansive you become. Yes, you can terrorize the world and become very famous with that or feared by that, but as a result of that, you actually become smaller, and you actually aggravate the diseases that are inside you. You can see that for all kind of world leaders at the moment when they start tightening the grip on their country, and at that moment they start also becoming more sick, and people start hoping that they will quickly die, and that is a prayer. So hoping for is a prayer, right? So this is very important. So let me now read something about the grandmother earth.
Praise to Supreme Void Mother, mysterious flowering, nourishing life preserving through scripture. Incense not, treasure seal, earth mother treasure, incense not, propagation for year 1, 36 Wu Su year to be avoided. May blessings, prosperity, longevity and joy be abundant. May the year of Wu Su be auspicious and the people be clean and peaceful. Regulate wind and rain. May the 5 grains be plentiful, the country be peaceful and prosperous. Mother Earth gives birth to all things, bringing tranquility to the heavens and to earth. Rivers and seas are silent, mountains and hills are swallowed. The Iwan Ling clouds gather to support true heaven. Free from impurity, earth is without chaos. Long celebration of bright wisdom, refined ascension, boundless compassionate one. The earth mother's true weft. The golden boys guard the golden gate, to the purple gold body in the golden hall. Gold dragons encircle the palace, carved with a golden lock, golden lion with a golden bell. In the beginning, Pangu was supreme ruler, and the two chi of yin and yang were paired with heaven and earth. All things are in origin wind and rain. First recite the Earth Mother wept when opening the hall. May our offerings bring joy to our parents, our blessings bring peace and prosperity to all people. Earth is earth, heaven is heaven, yin and yang are closely connected. Unify heaven, unify earth, and unify the three realms, encompassing the sky and earth, heaven and earth. Kan, Li, Chun, Tui fill the four pillars. Chen, Kun, Gun, Sun represent heaven. Earth Mother's root is made united from soil, encompassing both pre and post heaven. Divine Husband's root is the dark child. Be deaf, I mute. A perfect match. Shun merges with Qi to form heaven and earth. Qi and Shun combine to produce wise people. Truth goes to Mother, Mother does truth. Through Shun goes child, child becomes Shun. Yin-yang union is truth of making things flower. Heaven earth flowering produces wise rulers. Although not speaking people's language, all the time is okay. Mother and child are inseparable at pregnancy. 10 months of pregnancy approach. After 10 months, birth brings a complete form. With the fetus complete, 6 virtuous rulers are born. Heavenly Emperor, Earthly Emperor, Human Emperor, Fuxi, Xuanyuan, Shenong. Fuxi was able to make heaven and earth flower, divide the 8 images, the Pakwa, into yin and yang. Emperor Shenong governed the 5 grains. Emperor Xuanyuan governed clothing. Well, if you gotten this far in the video and you really enjoyed it, then I guess you know what to do.